Now that the van's got a few trips under its belt, I thought I would give a van tour, and we'll talk about the general construction and layout, the water system, the electrical system, using the power, charging the batteries, and then we'll talk a little bit about climate control. Here's a quick look of the interior of the van. We still have a few little odds and ends to finish, but I don't think you ever completely finish with your van. The doors, ceiling, floor, and walls are all insulated with Rockwool insulation. The walls are 1/2-inch maple plywood. The cabinets are made from 3/4 maple plywood. The cabinets and drawers all have latching knobs to keep things from opening while you're moving. The ceiling is 3/4 pine tongue and groove. The floor is 3/4 plywood on top of 2x2s with Rockwool insulation between the 2x2s and then laminate vinyl on top of the plywood. The countertop is made from basswood planks, and we decided to use that because of its lightweight. In this drawer we have the Dometic CFX55 12-volt refrigerator. The under cabinet lights and accent lights both have dimmers on them. And a remote to turn the lights on and off. And one of the reasons we chose the Promaster is because we can have a full twin bed side to side, and on top we have a smaller bunk. And this is a resin ocean table that we made on top of a lagoon swivel mount and a bench seat. And if you don't have access to a bathroom, we have a portable toilet underneath here. We also added running boards to make it easier to get in and out of the van, and we also installed rain guards on the windows. Now let's talk about the water system. We have a 55-gallon freshwater tank with a sea level tank monitor underneath the bed. Also underneath the bed is a Remco Aquajet 55 variable speed pump, and we used PEX tubing throughout the van. In the back of the van we have a 6-gallon water heater. It's 1200 watts and it takes about 30 minutes to heat the water. On the counter we have a copper sink and a faucet. Underneath the van is a 25-gallon gray water tank with a sea level tank monitor and an electric drain. And this is the tank monitor. We can see freshwater level in percent, and we can see gray water tank in percent. Finally, on the water system we have a lockable fill compartment on the outside of the van. Since we don't use this for drinking water, we can use just a normal water hose to fill the tank. Let's talk about the electrical system in the van. In the initial design of the van, there was a couple things that were pretty high on our list. One was no noisy rooftop AC. The other was the ability to boondock off-grid with all the comforts of home. Now that created several problems. One is climate control. We had seen a few videos where people had put mini splits on a van, but the ones that said they could do it off-grid were in the mountains at 75 degrees. Well, that's pretty easy. But what if you're somewhere where it's 95 degrees? So during my investigation of how to plan out the van, looking at RV electrical supplies, it was pretty crazy. And this is coming from someone who's worked in electrical all their life. So to simplify things for myself and for explaining to my wife, I decided to convert everything to watts and watt hours. For batteries, we decided to go with the Renogy lithium iron phosphate, 170 amp hours each, and they are wired in parallel, so that gives us a total of 340 amp hours. Now when you're trying to explain to someone how long a 1200 watt microwave can run on 340 amp hours, it gets a little complicated. So to convert it to watt hours, we take the 340 amp hours, multiply that by 12.8 volts, and that gives us 4,352 watt hours. For maximum life of the battery, they recommend not going below 20% charge, so that means we have 80% of our capacity available. So we multiply the 4,352 watts by 80%, and we end up with 3,481 usable watt hours. This is a chart we came up with on our van listing the devices, the wattage, how long we think we might use it per day, and we ended up with just under 3,000 watt hours per day. So based on that, we think our batteries will be sufficient to run for at least one day with no charging at all. Now we'll talk about using power. And we'll start with the 12-volt devices that we have, which would be the Dometic fridge, the LED lights, the Max Air fan, and the water pump. The 115-volt devices includes 2 receptacles with USB chargers for the bedrooms, a 115-volt receptacle with USB chargers for the countertop for the induction burner, microwave, or anything else that you would want to plug in there. The 6-gallon water heater, which is 1440 watts. And finally, on the 115-volt circuits is the mini split. To get our 115-volt power, we have a 3000 watt pure sine wave inverter from Renogy. We also have a transfer switch that we can use if we're plugged into shore power. These are the 115-volt circuit breakers. Down here are the 12-volt fuses, and this is the 4-channel remote which we have to turn on the cabinet lights. And this is our shore power plug on the back of the van if we happen to be in a place that has power. Now we're going to talk about charging the batteries. We have 3 different options on charging the batteries. Option number 1, of course, is solar. We have 3 335 watt Panasonic solar panels for a total of 1005 watts. Each solar panel has a separate breaker and are wired in parallel to the Victron 150/70 MPPT solar charger. The output of this charger is 70 amps at 14.2 volts. Option number 2 is to use the alternator connected to a Sterling Power BB1260 battery-to-battery charger. This monitors the alternator, and when the voltage is over 13.2 volts, it uses the alternator power to charge the batteries. And if it's sunny when you're driving, you'll be charging with the alternator and the solar panels. And the third option is a Victron 17 amp battery charger that is only connected when we're using shore power. So how do you know where your battery level is? We have a Renogy battery monitor. It's calibrated for the 340 amp hour batteries, and it calculates the power going in and coming out of the battery and displays the level. And lastly, let's talk about climate control, and we'll talk about cooling first. Option 1 for cooling is the Max Air roof fan. Now this is good if it's not very warm outside, or if you're going to be out of the van for a little while, you can turn it on and let it remove the hot air while you're not inside the van. And the second option is the mini split. This is a Cooper & Hunter Sophia model. It's a 25 SEER 115 volt unit. It's an inverter unit, which means the compressor and fan are variable speed. And on cool mode, the max is 600 watts. And as the van cools down and gets closer to the setting, it's usually in the 200 to 300 watt range. And then when it cools below the setting, it runs about 25 watts just for the inside unit fan. It's a 9000 BTU unit, and I did a separate video on a 3-day off-grid test, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. And we have ran it at night in just fan mode only, and it pulls about 25 watts in fan mode. I used 80/20 aluminum to make the mounting bracket, and you can't see it, but there are 3 bolts on each bracket going through the door with metal bracing on the inside. Plus, just for extra security, I put 1/2-inch bolts through the bumper. And the inside unit is mounted on the wall up near the ceiling. The remote has a follow me mode, which uses the temperature of the remote to control the unit, and that is usually what we use. I used flexible refrigerant lines to make it where we could still open and close the door, because all the electrical is inside the doors, and there may be times when you need to open the door and get inside. Now for heating, we have 2 options. The first one is a Webasto Airtop 2000 STC gasoline powered heater. This heater uses about 1 gallon of gas per day, and it uses 40 watts of DC power for the fan. And you can see the heat exhaust and the return vent underneath the toe kick of the counter. And the second option for heating is the split unit itself. We tested it in early April at Jekyll Island. The overnight low was 40 degrees, and we ran it all night at 70 degrees, and our battery the next morning was 53%. So it works pretty well for heating as well. That's all of the van tour. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll be glad to answer them.